All right, guys. So we're going to hop back in and pick up on the second part of exercise 2 with looking at basic animating on the timeline. Again, this is just to get your feet wet with how to play with the animation tools and concepts of animation. We'll go a little bit more in depth in exercise 3 when we start looking at some of this, some of the advanced ways to play with animation. So, a couple things to understand about animation, just in general. A big misconception, okay, this is the big one, that animation is only defined by cartoons, right? Like that's what everyone assumes when you hear the word animation is they think cartoon. Bam.
Yes.
Okay, so thank you. Someone actually affirmed that.
Correct.
Correct. And that is correct. But it's completely false. Like the idea that animation can only be defined by a cartoon is only a single definition for it. Animation is defined as putting something in motion or changing the state of something over a period of time. And if you think about it, even video, by playing several still images back to back to give the illusion of motion, has the same definition plugged into it. It shows the change of state of something over time in rapid succession. That's why cartoon animation just gets associated with that automatically because of the hand-drawn effect and how every frame is different. When you're working with it technically, though, it does indicate a state of change, but it needs something to tell that. And when you're working with it in a digital interface like this, they use a system called keyframes, or key framing. That is the base building block for making something change over a period of time. So for example, if you were wanting a ball to go from the left side of the screen to the right side of the screen, you would have to first tell it to start on the left, and then over a period of, let's say, 5 seconds, cross the screen and end up on the right. You would have to tell it just to do that simple thing, a keyframe to start it at, and then a keyframe to indicate where it's going to end at. And that's it. The bare minimum of animation requires at least a minimum of 2 keyframes to make something change over time. That's it. So we're going to look at that inside of After Effects practically to see how that operates. So we're going to start off by adding a new shape to our timeline area, or our layer stack. I'm going to start fresh here, so I don't have any layers to play with. And I'm going to go up to my shape drawing tools, and I'm going to add an ellipse. And I'm just going to draw it out here. Not too big, keep it kind of small. All right, once you've got a shape drawn out there, now we're going to come down and we're going to go down into our layer properties. So expand your layer properties for your shape layer, expand the contents, and let's expand the ellipse contents. And let's go down into its transform ellipse 1 properties. Now again, I used ellipse. I don't know what you have. Maybe you have a square or something. That's okay. I realize that as I'm calling that out. So just track with me that you need to make it to the transform for your respective shape. So we get inside there, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to change up the location of my object. We're going to do that left to right movement real fast. So there are a couple ways that you can shift things around in After Effects inside the comp window. I'm actually going to switch to my black arrow move tool up on my menu bar at the top, just so I can have that active. And so I don't draw shapes on the fly, because I don't want to do that right now. So I got that on. And again, what I was about to tell you is that you can move shapes several different ways, or change their transformations. One, you can drag directly inside the shape area and pull it off your comp or around to move it. That's kind of the loose, sort of flexible way to move objects around or change their relative transformation properties. You can also use the numeric values down in your property box area in your contents of your layer. So I'm going to just drag it off screen here to the left and put it just outside your composition viewing area. If you're not zoomed out far enough on your comp window that you can't see outside of it, again, adjust your zoom values by either using the percentage or hitting Command minus to zoom out on your screen a little bit until you can see outside of the boundaries of your comp window. Any objects that you have floating around out here, if you have it selected, it will show a silhouette outline of it to indicate where it is visibly or visually. Yeah. All right, so we have that out there. And there are a couple things that you need to take into consideration before you start dropping keyframes all over the place. Number one, you need to make a choice about when you want the object or the thing that you're working with to change on the timeline. So if you look in your timeline area, half of your lower window, you've got your purple kind of extended track up there. Notice that any shape layer you create has a track that stretches from the very beginning all the way to the end of your timeline because it's a static object. You can always shorten it by clicking and dragging the in or out points of that particular track to make it not appear for the entire duration of your timeline. And I recommend doing that if it's going to be a shape that you only have pop up once in your animation. There's no reason to leave the track extended all the way through because After Effects and export will have to deal with that information in the background. It will continuously try to render even an invisible shape. It will try to render the path outline for it invisibly in the background, and that just takes up extra resources you don't want to waste. So I'm just going to shorten it down here, like just inside the 15-second marker on my time ruler. And again, if you can't tell where your time ruler is set to for if it's zoomed in too close or too far, you can use this little skinny gray bar and grab the little blue handles above your time ruler to zoom in or zoom out on it. And I'm just going to shorten mine down and sort of drag it right back here to the beginning. And what I want to do is I want to tell After Effects that I want this object to start animating and moving on the timeline after a couple seconds. So I'm going to pull my playhead towards the right very slowly. And as I pull my playhead to the right, you should notice your time code over on the left of your timeline panel change. That's that blue time code over there, really nice and big. As you drag your playhead, that number changes. So I'm just going to drag my playhead up till it's about three seconds-ish into the clip or into the timeline. And then I'm going to go back down into my transform ellipse properties. Now again, it's important that you set the position of the playhead before you drop in any keyframes. So we got that positioned. Now we're going to look at keyframing one of these properties. So to enable keyframes for any property, what you want to look for is next to the term or the name of the property, there's a little tiny icon to the left of the term that looks like a stopwatch. That is your keyframing property for that item. So I'm going to turn it on for position. So click on the little icon to the left of the word position. It should turn blue. And you should see a couple things change on your screen in the layer area. Number one, where your playhead is listed in the timeline, there is now a little blue diamond directly in alignment with it, straight across from your position values and settings. So you should see that in direct alignment with your playhead. If you look to the far left, you should notice that there's a blue diamond and two grayed out arrows around it. That is your keyframe navigator for that particular setting or property for position. That navigator allows you to slide between keyframes easily, and it also allows you to drop in new keyframes easily too, which we'll talk about in a minute. So now move your playhead over to the right for a second, and you should see that little blue diamond left in place And again, that turned on automatically whenever you queue up keyframes for a property. It will always drop a keyframe immediately. Now you don't have to keep it, but if you delete it, you turn off the keyframing for that option. So you have to kind of make choices about where you drop stuff before you start playing with it sometimes. Or at least have some plan as you go. Now we got the first keyframe in, and that sets our starting position in this case. It's the first one we're going to work with. Now we're going to slide our playhead forward. Again, I'm going to go from where my first keyframe was, which was at about 3 seconds. And I'm going to drag my playhead forward to about another 3 seconds up. So up to about where it says 6 seconds on my time code. And now that I've got that there, I'm going to initiate a new keyframe, and there's a couple ways you can do this. The first way you can do it is kind of the loose sort of organic method, which is move your playhead, and then if it's a basic transform property, click and drag your object in the comp window to where you want it to go next. So I'm going to take my object and pull it all the way across the screen and go out to the other side or the opposite side of the comp window on the right. So it should be out of screen now. And now look in your timeline again, and you should notice a brand new keyframe dropped in place. After Effects is geared to record property changes automatically. There are ways to turn it off, but it's not very useful with it turned off. It's much more helpful when you leave it on like this so that you can get instant changes. So now that we have that rigged, we're going to do one more thing to preview this. What we want to do here first is shorten this giant gray bar that's below your time ruler. Grab one of the blue handles around its outer edges. Remember, this gray bar represents the render area or work area. So the shorter we have that, the less time After Effects has to spend processing preview frames when we want to watch playback. So I'm going to rewind my playhead, and I'm going to hit spacebar to preview. And now as my playhead travels across the object crosses screen. And so now what we've generated, again, you've made your very first animation in After Effects. Congratulations. Don't you feel better now?
I'm struggling to bounce.
So here are a couple things that are going on. Again, once you've managed to make the object cross, again, all it took were these two different keyframes. That's all that's been changed here, is I've added these two little keyframes into my timeline, one spaced apart from the other with a little bit of duration in between to indicate a change in time or settings. So I want to talk a little bit here real fast about dealing with those keyframes now that we have a basic animation applied on the timeline, as far as manipulating them and adjusting them. So first things first, if you get a keyframe out here, if you ever want to change the speed of the animation that you just generated, like if you want the thing to go faster or slower now that you've dropped it in, well, now all you have to do is a matter of changing the distance between these two keyframes. So I'm going to drag this second keyframe. I'm going to click on it to highlight it blue and drag it further away from my first keyframe. And I'm going to generate a brand new playback. So I'm going to drag my playhead back and hit space again and let it play. And now my object travels a little bit more slowly and moseying across the screen until it exits. So now,
fill it in.
Huh?
It'll fill it in.
Yeah, so what it does, this is what's technically occurring in the animation. In a classic animation world of hand-drawn stuff, they do what are called in-between frames, or what they call in-betweens, which basically the real animator, the lead animator, will draw the first keyframed positions of a character or something, and then they will have a person come in who will draw all of the in-between motion connections to jump from a head facing one direction to making it twist to face left or right. And those are called in-between frames to complete that illusion of motion. And it does the same in After Effects. It just computes the change of this object going from here to the other side of the screen in our case, and it draws all the in-between information to make it travel. And that's what's happening on the fly. So it's drawing all of that for us. Now, After Effects does animate in a linear fashion initially, so it just makes linear changes between one keyframe to the next. If you are wanting it to do something more complex, then you need more keyframes. So let's say that I wanted to take this ball and I actually wanted to make it bounce. Okay, well, bouncing is not going to happen from me just dragging this around on screen and hoping that the next keyframe makes it work. It just won't do that. You have to give it keyframes for every different type of movement or motion that you want to get out of it, generally speaking. So here we go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make my ball bounce into scene. So I've already got a keyframe established for where it's going to start off screen and the level it's going to start at. I'm going to pull my playhead forward a little bit to where my ball is on screen. And I'm going to take my ball inside my screen and I'm going to drag it up. And then what you can do as you go to review your animation work is always rewind your playhead to see how things are changing over time. So always pull it, drag it back and forth to see how the animation is going. But now that I've changed that, notice my object now travels up towards that point of my keyframe I just added. And then by proxy, it automatically travels back down to meet up with where the last recorded keyframe goes to. So if I want to keep this bounce up, then I can tell it, I'm going to push past the second keyframe that I added just a little bit, and I'm going to drag my ball down to generate a new frame, a new keyframe, and then I'm going to pull my playhead a little bit forward and make it bounce up again. Pull my playhead forward, bounce it down, pull it forward, bounce it up, and then I'm just going to let it exit screen. So what I get from the change up here is the ball making a little bit more of a bounce. Now it's kind of it's very robotic right now. There are advanced things that I'll show you guys later with how to smooth that out with things like interpolation and roving and such that'll help out a lot. But for the time being, you just need to keep in mind with the basics that to make it do different types of movement, you need to tell it where to go, because it's not just going to understand that if you drag your mouse around. Okay, so that's kind of giving a basic animation property to an object. As far as dealing with those keyframes, besides moving them around, like I was saying a minute ago, the further you push keyframes apart, the longer it takes for that change in the animation to occur. Likewise, the closer you put two keyframes together, the faster the animation change will occur between those two keyframes. That's a keyframing basic applied to anything, so make sure that you don't forget that. But you can always edit your position of your keyframes by clicking and dragging them in the timeline anytime you need to. Another thing to keep in mind is if you don't want a keyframe, right, you dropped one in, you can always select it in the timeline and hit delete on your keyboard to drop it out to get rid of it. Some other things that you can do to keyframes, just so you're aware, you can also double click on a keyframe that you've dropped in the screen to change its values. So if I double clicked on my first one here, it actually shows me the position properties that are set for that keyframe. And so it gives me the exact position values that my circle will appear at starting at that point. And I can change or retype them and it will manipulate or change that particular keyframe. I said a minute ago at the beginning of this that you could actually change the position of your playhead to navigate from one keyframe to the next. You can do that over here on the far left of your property that's active by using the little white arrow keys that surround the little blue diamond. And that will automatically move your playhead from keyframe to keyframe. You may notice in between those two white arrows there is a little diamond icon in between them. If you don't have it hovering over a keyframe, it will be hollowed out black. And what that means you can do is actually drop a fresh keyframe into your timeline for that property to either maintain a position of animated activity, or to, again, once you drop it, you can actually change the value of that property to enact a new property animation change. And that's just dropping it in from over here on the side. But that's really all it takes to add animation in After Effects. You can use this exact same process for keyframe dropping for any property that has that stopwatch icon next to it. So look in your layer properties, and you will find, this icon next to anything. And just in the transform area where we are, we've got it for all of the options from anchor point changes to opacity. If I back out a little bit, I can also animate the size of my ellipse over time or its position. If I look under my stroke properties, I can also animate the color to shift over time for my stroke color. I can animate my stroke width over time. Tons of stuff that you can change. And it all works the same way. Now, that being said, different properties do have different types of value systems that you can change or animate. If you look down in the transform properties again for your object, opacity only works based on a percentage number, which means that you can actually make your object fade in or fade out over time. If you want to transition it on screen, you can use that just by animating it. Rotation works off of degrees. So everything has something a little bit different incorporated into it that you can play off of. Question.
How do you make something convincingly roll?
To convincingly roll, it needs to be a shape that actually has details on it that make it look as though or give the illusion of it rolling.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to make it roll, you can use rotation, obviously.
Yeah.
And you can use like the X feature, like here. It's not going to work with my circle because it's perfectly round, so you're never going to know if it's rolling or not, unless it has some other surface design features to indicate otherwise. So instead I'll do it with something else here. Let's use the rectangle. Good old square wheels.
Yeah.
And I'm going to take this object and I'm going to make it rotate over time. And I'm going to get rid of this circle. Okay. So go into my rectangle properties, transform, and pull my playhead back a little bit. And I'm going to go under where it says rotation, turn on the keyframe. And again, you can start it with nothing. And then I'll drag it ahead to about 5 seconds, maybe. And I'm going to use this scaling factor here, the multiplication factor option. Not just the degrees. This is for like fine tuning or fine turning. X will make it do 360 degree rotations. So I'll make it do like 2 complete 360 degree rotations over a period of about, what is this, 5 seconds? So now, when I rewind it, it now spins on its own, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that gives you basic rotation. Now you can obviously make it spin faster by changing the value of this option from like 2x to, you can go crazy and make it spin much, much faster.
And then do you just also keyframe the position in order to make it look like it's rolling across?
Yep. So then I'll, Color is just a matter of animating the stroke of the fill property for a selected object. So that's just coming up and going into one of these options right here or here. And then go directly to where it says color and turn on the stopwatch. And then you just change the color same way we did with like rotation. You need at least 2 keyframes separated over time. But yeah, if you wanted to make a simple object roll across screen, yeah, you would just have a keyframe set up for rolling and one for position. So you could have it start there, and then after 5 seconds, you can make it, again, roll across screen somewhere. So now it goes somewhere.
It's struggling.
Yeah, it is kind of struggling to cross the screen.
It is a rectangle.
It is a. It shouldn't be doing that well.
Yeah.
It should be very bumpy. Yeah. But that's how you can do that. Now there's other fun effects that you can add when you animate. Like you can actually create simulated motion blur for moving objects that have rapid movement in After Effects, which are a lot of fun to play with. Now I'm not going to go over those today, but that's stuff that we'll cover at a later exercise. You're welcome to look up whenever you want to, though. Now that, again, that's just giving basic animation properties to anything in After Effects. Once you kind of master how to drop keyframes for anything and use that stopwatch, you can basically animate anything in here to your heart's content. So I would recommend experimenting with that, and also experiment with like adding like special effects to a layer and animating the properties of a special effect and see what that does. From the Effects and Presets panel. You can get a lot of interesting changes over time with those in particular. So any other questions related to working with animation? Okay. So that'll conclude this part of exercise 2. Again, review the document online if you're looking for information on how to work with the drawing tools. I also have several links to working and keyframing animation in After Effects. So talk to you later and see you then.